Out front now, Jessie Wilczewski. She witnessed the shooting at the Chesapeake Walmart. In fact, she's working there. It was just her 5th day on the job. Jessie, thank you for being with us tonight. I know this is tough. You were in that break room when the gunman came in. You saw a lot.
Yeah.
Can you walk
Yeah.
us through, Jessie, what you saw and what happened in those moments?
So, before every shift, we have a meeting in the break room right at 10 o'clock, and mostly everybody was in there, and the meeting had just started, and all of a sudden, I looked straight instead of looking off where the other guy was talking, and the other team lead is in the doorway, and he's got his hands like that. And at first, it didn't even look real. It didn't register as real. The only thing that made it real was the vibrations hitting your chest and the ringing from the gun going off. And it just kept going and going and going. And I got under the table, and he left the room and went left down the hallway. And I was looking at my other coworkers around me on the floor and leaned over in the chair, and I didn't want to be loud. I didn't want him to hear me and make him mad, to make him come back, because I don't even know where he went. And I didn't leave. I stayed. Just I couldn't. I wouldn't want to be left alone, even if they weren't there, or if they were there. I don't even know. I tried really hard not to look, and the sound of the droplets, it replays and replays and replays and replays and replays of how much blood was coming off the different chairs. It was making a rhythm, and it was one of the most disturbing things. I think we'll never let go of that.
I mean, it's understandable. It's so you're under the table then for safety. You talk about feeling the bullets as the shots rang out, feeling that in your chest, hearing the blood from your coworkers, watching them in those moments. As I understand it, the shooter did look at you at one point and basically
At the
let you
very
go.
end, the very end, I was hiding underneath the table, and he told me to come out, and I had my bag, and I put my bag out first as like a please, I don't have anything, you see my hands type thing. And I slid out from out underneath of the table, and I'm shaking, and I probably looked like a chihuahua at that point, and he just had the gun up to my forehead, and it's just really hard.
Did he say anything to you in that moment, Jessie?
He told me to go home.
Authorities have identified 5 of the 6 people who were killed in a Virginia Walmart after the store's manager began firing Tuesday night before killing himself. All 6 victims were employed by Walmart. The shooter is identified as 31-year-old Andre Bing, saying he was armed with one handgun and had multiple magazines on his person. He was an overnight team lead and been employed with Walmart since 2010. He also left a death note outlining grievances against people in his life, city officials. The note on his phone talked about God, the Holy Spirit, and how he felt like his associates were mocking him. The gunman had no criminal history, and the weapon was legally purchased on Tuesday. And it's also said that people warned Walmart about this person, but they were ignored.
Out front now, Jessie Wilczewski. She witnessed the shooting at the Chesapeake Walmart.
Our next guest is an eyewitness to the deadly shooting inside that Walmart. She says she worked alongside the shooter one day before the tragedy and was inside of that break room when the suspect opened fire. Her name is Breonna Tyler. She's only been a Walmart employee, she tells, for a couple of months, and she joins us now live from her home. Breonna, thank you for taking the time for being with us. How are you? How are you doing today?
I'm still processing things. I can't get the visual out of my head, but I'm okay physically, of course, but just mentally and emotionally, it's definitely a lot to take in. It definitely is a lot, but I'll be okay.
I'm glad to hear that. Being able to focus on that, I can't imagine. So tell us about those moments. You said processing it. What are you processing?
Well, I was literally just getting to work. Our shift is from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I got there a few minutes late. About 10:06 is when I clocked in on my phone. I walked to the break room like normal. That's where we have our nightly meeting of where everyone's going to be, stocking their particular section. And, I'm just standing there. There were a few things that seemed like off to me about that whole night that they stick out more to me now that situation has happened. Like, just different things, like the maintenance man, who actually the first person to end up getting hit, he actually went around the entire room and gave everyone trash bags, which he doesn't normally does, so that stuck out to me. And then, like, when I walked in the room, something in me told me not to sit down. I don't know exactly what it was, but something just said, just stand up, and I just stood up the entire time. And as soon as the team lead said he was about to get the meeting started, he said, "All right, guys, we have a really light night tonight." And as soon as he said that, the supervisor or the manager just came around the corner and literally just opened fire and just started swaying his arm back and forth. He didn't have a target. He didn't, he wasn't aiming for anybody specifically. He literally was just shooting across the entire break room.
It's terrifying. I mean, that just sounds unimaginable. And how did you keep yourself safe? You just hit the deck? Did you run?
I honestly, at first, I froze because I thought I was in like a simulation. It felt fake in the very moment, because I'm literally looking at this man and I see the smoke leaving the gun, but it's just not registering to me because I think it was the fact that I recognized his face. If it were someone that I had never seen before, then I feel like it would have been realer in that moment. But the fact that this is somebody that I worked with and I talked to and I was next to every day, it was just like, this can't be real. And so I saw all of my coworkers diving onto the floor, and I'm just looking around like, what's going on? And then once I saw blood, I was like, oh, this is really real. And then that's when it processed that, like, you have to run or you're gonna die. And then I just booked it through the store, and all I kept saying was, don't trip, don't fall, don't look back, just run. And that's exactly what I did. I just ran straight for the front door.
Cannot imagine what you went through. Tell us, if you can, a little bit about the supervisor, about the shooter. You said you felt uneasy about that employee meeting leading up to the shooting. Was it because of something about the supervisor, about the shooter?
Not necessarily that night, like not necessarily last night, but I would say he was just the supervisor that everyone warned everybody else about. So when you first started at that job, it was like, okay, this is the supervisor that is most likely going to pick on you, or he's going to have an issue with what you do and things like that. So, you know, I had it noted in the back of my head that, you know, oh, okay, cool, you know, we might run into an issue, but I never thought that it would be anything to this extent. Because like I said, he didn't say anything. He didn't point to anyone specific. He didn't aim at anyone specific. It was like he was just out to get any and everybody that he worked with. He genuinely just did not care.
And Brianna, you said it was a handgun that he was using?
Yes.
You got a sense of how many shots he got off?
He let off probably about 8 to 10 in the break room alone. Like he was just literally just swaying his
You
arm
know, y'all
back
better
and
leave folks alone. You know, I've been in my profession for 29 years, and you will be amazed at the people who harass folk, pick on people,
Our next
talk
guest
about
is an
people behind
eyewitness
their
to the deadly
back, run to the supervisor and tell lies. You'll just be amazed at the different things that happen within the workforce. You know, just yesterday I had someone angry because I sent an email telling the individual that the student's throat was hurting and that another person's eyes were red. I thought maybe they had pink eye. And another person sounded like they were wheezing, like they have asthma. I have asthma, and the coughing was very strange. But, you know, that's part of my responsibility to report these things. And a person got mad because I sent them an email um, and blabbed their mouth to other coworkers in a negative way. Leave folks alone. You know, people on these jobs, they make fun of people, they mock people, they're gonna snap. You know, I'm not saying it's right, but it's a reality. All this gossiping and making fun of folks or making people feel not welcome, ostracizing people, lying on people. I had someone tell a supervisor I wasn't doing my job correctly. And they never observed me doing my job. Now, it's one thing if you actually observed my work and talked to me about my experience and background, but this person couldn't, had no evidence.
It has been more than a week since 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in a home near campus, and police have not identified who killed them. 3 of the victims lived at the house where the attack occurred. The 4th was there visiting his girlfriend. Police believe they were targeted. With us now is retired agent and former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole. She's the director of George Mason University's Forensic Science Program. Mary Ellen, it's great to talk to you again, although sadly, tragically, we're always talking to you when something horrific has happened. So when you look at this story, Mary Ellen, what sticks out to you about this case and what investigators are looking for?
Well, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. And I know investigators said that the victims were targeted, and that's a behavioral term that has a lot of meaning to me. So the question is, how are they making that determination? And were they all equally targeted? And the way that assessment has to be made is to see if any of the victims were treated differently in that crime scene. In other words, if one victim received more injuries or was treated differently after the stabbing occurred. And that usually tells you that that person could have been the focus of the attack. And then secondly, this offender had to leave a lot of evidence at that crime scene. He was not evidence conscious, and so there will be forensic evidence. For example, it's likely that the offender cut themselves with the knife. After you stab that many times, your hand goes down on the blade and you cut yourself and you leave blood there, and that's DNA evidence. And so that evidence is going to be extremely important. And then finally, just based on going inside somebody else's home in the middle of the night with other people there to commit a quadruple homicide suggests to me that that person has likely been in that home prior to this attack, and that this individual, this offender, has prior experience being in other people's homes.
So, Mary Ellen, I'm wondering about the time frame here. Are there any gaps in the timeline from when the victims were last seen and when they were found dead?
It does seem that there's some gaps because, and that information may not ever be able to be filled in because the victims themselves would be the ones to tell you, we got home at this time and then we went to bed at that time. So I don't know that that will ever be completed, but the question remains, at what point did the offender get inside that house? And were all the victims, they were in their beds is what it sounds like, but were they all asleep? If they were not all equally asleep in a deep sleep, that could also explain some of the defensive injuries on several of the victims, although that's not been clarified. So that timeline is getting narrower and narrower, but I'm not sure it will ever be pinned down 100%.
4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death on November the 13th in Moscow, Idaho. They were found deceased on the second and third floor of their homes. They were roommates Madison Morgan, Kaylee Gonclaves, Zaina Canoodle, were all roommates living in the same home. And the fourth victim, Ethan Chapon, did not live there but was dating one of the residents. On Saturday night, they were at a party, a fraternity or sorority party on campus, and they returned home about 1:45 a.m. on Sunday, November the 13th. 2 of the victims were at a bar called the Corner Club. They left the bar, stopped at a food truck, and returned home about 1:45 a.m. The coroner said the victims were likely asleep, but some of them had defensive wounds and were stabbed multiple times, according to the police, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. 2 other surviving roommates who lived in the house were out separately in Moscow and returned home by 1 a.m., and they appeared to have slept through the stabbings. One student, Madison, was a marketing major. Kaylee was majoring in general studies. Miss Canoodle was a marketing major. And Ethan was majored in recreation, sport, and tourism management. Authorities have also seized the contents of 3 dumpsters. They also moved some vehicles, and they told reporters that they believe it was a targeted attack. Folks, we got to be aware of our surroundings, who we befriend, who we talk to, who we let
It
in
has
our
been more than a week
homes,
since 4 University
who
of
we
Idaho
invite
students
into
were
our
found stabbed to death in
homes.
a
This is so tragic. And why are they dead? For nothing. Let's go on to our next story.
Mexican prosecutors want the friend of a woman from North Carolina to be extradited back to Mexico to face questionings about the woman's death. They also revealed that Shanquilla Robinson was killed in a, quote, direct attack, not an accidental one. I spoke with Robinson's father last night about what he wants to see, what kind of justice he expects from Mexico and from the U.S., and why he blames his daughter, Shanquilla Robinson's friends, for her death.
I want the truth, man. I just want them to get back over there and tell the Mexican authorities why they did what they did. I can't even be a grandfather. I can't even walk her down the aisle, man. The only thing I can do is cherish the moments that we had, the 25 years while she was here on this earth.
I want to bring in now Deborah Blum to talk more about this case. She is a criminal defense attorney. Deborah, as I mentioned, Mexican authorities are seeking an extradition for an American woman. They haven't identified the person by name. What we know so far about the story, of course, is that Shanquilla Robinson's friend said that it was alcohol poisoning. Then an autopsy revealed a different story, that she died from an injury to her neck and her back. And then we saw these videos, extremely graphic, showing this woman being attacked. What are the next steps to get somebody extradited? I know that Mexico and the U.S. have had an extradition treaty since 1862, then it was ratified again in 1978. We know of many cases where Mexico extradites people to the U.S. to face justice here, but how consequential is this order at this point? How long may it take, and what's next?
You know, each situation is an individual process. I'm imagining here that because of the horrific nature of this murder, that the extradition will happen sooner rather than later. The American authorities will have to locate the woman who is wanted for Miss Robinson's death, and then they'll have a proceeding here where she'll be brought into court and the judge will determine whether or not she will be extradited. I don't see any reason why she wouldn't be returned to Mexico to face criminal charges.
So, I mean, one of the things that I'm curious about too is if for some reason the U.S. is not, successful in extraditing her to Mexico, or Mexico is not successful in the U.S. Getting her there, can the U.S. or authorities here also press charges? Could she face some kind of legal consequence here as well?
Generally, they would not be able to move forward with the prosecution here for a murder that occurred in another country, but stranger things have happened. People are prosecuted for crimes that primarily took place in other countries, but impacted the United States. So I think that people do want to see justice for Miss Robinson, and people in the justice system here will go to whatever ends are necessary to make sure that that happened. I mean, this is certainly another Natalie Holloway situation, which is really terrible. This was a beautiful young woman who had her whole future ahead of her, and it seems like her friends are the perpetrator of this gruesome death.
You know, I also wonder the alternative, which is what Mexico is seeking. If this person, or even the friends, because just from reading the police reports from Mexican authorities, it says that, they're not done. It's not necessarily just this person who could face charges, that their investigation continues, and others could be brought to justice for either being accessories or taking part in a cover-up and things like that. But what kind of rights do Americans have while facing charges in another country, in this case, of course, being Mexico?
Well, I want to touch upon the fact that here, the individuals, if they're caught not telling the truth to U.S. authorities who are assisting in this investigation, we know that the FBI is involved, then those individuals could face charges in the United States for interfering with the investigation and various other charges. In terms of the process of getting them to Mexico and what the criminal case will look like in Mexico, I can't speak to the specifics of what a proceeding is like in Mexico. I can only tell you about the process here in the United States, but I'm imagining it's going to be somewhat of a similar process. Generally, you are considered innocent until you're proven guilty, and there will be a negotiation process, and she'll have the right to a defense. But we do know that many other countries are very different, and the United States is a country where we truly have rights that others don't.
Deborah Blum, thank you for that insight.
This is such a disturbing case, and I'm just so tired of people calling these 6 individuals friends, because they're not friends. They're frenemies.
From North Carolina.
That's what they are, frenemies. People who pretend that they're your friend, but they're not. And you really got to watch people's snide remarks and comments. For example, if people appear to always have something negative to say, they can't compliment you. They make statements like you're the only one with a nice house, nice car, nice clothes, but they see that you're working 2 and 3 jobs. We really have to have discernment and have a relationship with our inner being and a supreme being, and be in touch with our spirituality to discern who's true and who's false. Was anyone in her corner? Did anyone ever see this coming? Now, there are a lot of rumors. Some say that she plotted against other people, but there's no evidence of that. And if that's the case, why would you retaliate? Why wouldn't you go to the police? Or why wouldn't you contact the authorities? But nevertheless, this is a tragic story. and a tragic ending to a beautiful life.